Hi everyone, so this video is just to talk through a couple of things that came out of the practical sessions last week. I think for the first tutorial I managed to get through quite a lot of this actually in the tutorial, but for the second one we didn't because we sort of spent more time doing the practical activities. So I just wanted to make sure that you're understanding particularly the theoretical elements of how you work with people with disabilities, what underpins good practice theoretically when you're coaching people with disabilities. So this is what these slides are for, and I'd really urge you, if you're going to go out and do your practical placement with people with disabilities and you're going to do your coach education session on that, there's some great chapters and resources on inclusive practice and inclusive practice in coaching that you can have a read through that are available on Moodle. They're all up there, so just have a flick through and see, particularly the work of Ken Black. Who's the other one? I think Ken Black's the main one to look at, and there's also some resources developed by sports organisations on how to work with people with disabilities as well in sport, so please have a look through. Just before we get onto it, I've got a quick YouTube clip to show you. I was banging on about in the session about actual real blind football in action, blind soccer in action. So I'll just try and pull that up now so you can have a look. This is actually David Beckham having a go at blind football, and there's some real interesting things in terms of what we were talking about in our session that I thought it might be good for you to have a look at. Oh, sorry. Hang on a second. There we go. Let's get it in the middle. There we go.
Number two, okay, ready, David? Just cut on the blindfold. Okay. Right, you take my bicep. We're going to have a little jog. Amazing. How's that? It's that feeling that obviously you're very trusting, is what I would say. Stand still, stand still. Good. Yeah, just go to your. That's it, good. Then you come to my voice. A little past mid again. Well done. Yes, David. Coming into it. Yeah. Come straight for goal, Robin. Come shoot. Leave it. Right. Well done. Stay.
So you have a look here how quickly and effortlessly the players that are genuinely blind are playing, and that was what I was trying to get across last week, that it will need some adaptation, but if you've got people that have been unable to see for quite some time, they're going to be very skilled at getting themselves around. Like, it's not going to be as stilted as it was when we sort of manufactured the disability ourselves.
Yeah, come in. Central, yes! Good goal. Really important to listen to the guy behind the goal where the posts are. Right post. Okay, centre!
So you see there again how it's supported. So you've got the person behind the goal is giving information to the goalkeeper about where the ball's coming, where it's being lined up to, so giving that visual awareness. So again, slight adaptations you'll need to think of as a coach. Okay, stop it. Right, okay, so back to the theoretical stuff. So as I talked about in the first two, and we sort of went through, there's obviously different categories of diversity, and depending on the category and who you're dealing with will depend on how you adjust and adapt as a coach. So we've got the different categories there, you can have a look through those. But I think probably the key thing is you might have a combination. So you might have someone with physical and learning difficulties. So you do have to be able to adapt to when these disabilities intersect as well. So, you know, not just preparing for people with vision impairments, recognising they might also have physical impairments as well. The key thing about disability is people can be born with it or they can acquire a disability. So that also will affect how well they respond. So if you've got someone who has recently acquired a disability, a person that's been involved in a car accident and is now a paraplegic, for example, they might struggle in terms of adapting to your activities and how you're coaching, how you're doing things, because they're not yet familiar with how their body works in that situation. Whereas someone that has always been in a wheelchair will be much more confident and competent with doing that. So sometimes as a coach, if there's an opportunity to ask people about the history of their disability, that can sometimes be helpful for understanding that and responding to it appropriately. Now, there's key models underpinning how we work with people with disabilities. These models have emanated from social work and govern how services are meant to see disability. So the model on the right, the medical model, is what has been the dominant sort of model underpinning disability work in sort of up to about a decade ago, really. And the medical model, as it sounds, is very much rationalised around medical approaches to dealing with disability. And if you're adopting a medicalised approach, you sort of see the person as being secondary to their disability. So if you see someone in a wheelchair, you see the wheelchair first. You don't actually care about Kate, the person who enjoys doing basketball and X, Y and Z. You just see that they're a person in a wheelchair. The medical model understands disability almost as being like an illness. So the only way you're going to kind of overcome it is to be cured, which obviously isn't going to happen for the majority of people with disabilities. Their disability isn't going to change. That's what they're going to live with for the rest of their lives. So the medicalised model really sort of excluded people on that grounds, in that, well, they're ill, we can't cure them, so what's the point really? And very much a sort of blame on the individual. So rather than seeing that disability might be created through problems with the environment and problems of access, it was really, well, it's this person's fault that they can't engage with society. So things like institutions and institutionalisation of people with disabilities has emerged from this medical model approach. So even up to sort of the mid to late 70s, it was fairly common for parents with disabled children to be encouraged to put them into institutions that would sort of take them out of mainstream society. It would hide them away from mainstream society. And the rationale was used for parents that they could better care for people with disabilities in these types of institutions. They were better off in there than they were within the family and home environment, which obviously now I think we can critique as absolute nonsense. The special school model also emanates from the medical model approach, this idea again of segregating people with disabilities out. Now there's a lot of debates around the special school and whether it's an appropriate model or not. A lot of advocates saying that people with disabilities should be integrated into the mainstream education setting, and that mainstream education should be inclusive enough to allow them to come in. On the flip side, others advocate, and this is people that are disabled or people with disabled children advocate, that mainstream education just can't cater for the often extreme needs of young people with severe disabilities, in which case the special school model can actually do this and can cater and can provide an educational experience that the child might not otherwise have. So pros and cons for the special school model, but very much developed out of that medical approach to disability. Then over the last sort of 15 years or so, there's been a bit of a paradigm shift in this area, and we've had what we call the social model of disability, which very much sees disability as, rather being about the individual, disability is actually created by barriers within society. So it's not the fault of the individual. The reason they can't participate actively in society and feel included is because society is structured in a way that won't allow them to be included. So that's things like physical access to structures, environmental access, all those types of things, but also attitudinal access and people's values and beliefs towards people with disabilities, which the social model suggests is a massive, people's stigma and negativity towards disability is a massive disabling feature of society and makes it very hard for people with disabilities to become integrated. So the social model, rather than seeing disabled person as sick, sees the person first and sees the person with disabilities as having resources and competencies and different attributes that they can offer and contribute to society and be part of a thriving society. But they have to be provided with the right environment and the right support to be able to do that. So if you're looking to work sort of in this area, you really do need to be underpinning what you want to do with the social model. And I think any sort of coaching that you talk about or education session that you talk about, you need to connect back to this social model and how it guides practice. So the stuff that we went over in the practical about adjustment of the environment, changing the rules, responding to the needs of people with disabilities in our communication, all that emanates from that social model ideal about changing the way we do things to be inclusive, rather than saying we've got a person with a disability in our session, that's a problem for them because I can't include them in how I've designed my session. That would be much more of a sort of medicalised approach to dealing with disability. So if you are doing this, have a read up a bit more on the social model and understanding of the social model, and make sure you're clear on how its approach would impact on coaching or teaching. Okay, so just finally, I just wanted to have a bit of a chat about the inclusion spectrum. And the inclusion spectrum comes out a lot in literature on how to organise sessions. So the idea being that basically an inclusive session is one that responds to the needs of the people in it, and modifications are made according to what the needs are of the people that are in your session. So as an inclusive sports coach working with people with disabilities, you might adopt any one of these different positions to how you adapt your session to ensure that people are involved. So you might have no modifications at all. If you're working with people who are deaf, you might actually be able to run the entire content of your session very effectively. You don't need to modify very much about the session in terms of content. Just some modifications on communication might be needed, so that might work with that particular group. Then you have some minor modifications where you might change, say, the ball that's used. So we might use for blind soccer, we might use the bell ball. That would be a minor modification to how we work, but we keep the rules of soccer, we keep the activities that we've previously used, we modify our communication a little bit. Then we have major modifications, so that's sort of, as it sounds, more considerable adjustments. So you might do something like an activity like seated volleyball that we're going to talk about in the practical in week 2, where you completely sort of change the game for people with physical disabilities. Major modifications would also be completely change the rules or physical space to accommodate the disability. Then you can kind of organise your sessions in different ways in terms of, are they primarily for people with disabilities? And as with the special school debate, there's different arguments for this. Sometimes people with disabilities prefer to participate with other people with similar disabilities. They feel more comfortable in that space, they feel more included. Others, and what we would suggest is genuine inclusion, is when people that have disabilities are able to participate with able-bodied, and the session can run, and it can run very fluidly, and everyone is integrated and having a good time. So that's almost the gold star of the sort of inclusion spectrum, but it is just sometimes it's not always appropriate. As we said with the special schools case, sometimes you have people with such severe disabilities you can't engage them in a mainstream session in a way that is going to bring any enjoyment to them or the other people participating. So that way you might need to adapt. The non-playing role is probably one to be avoided, but it's particularly handy for when you have people who are temporarily disabled. So they are injured for a period of time and you just don't think you can adapt really to get them in, so you give them a specific role within the session, but it's a non-playing one. And we obviously did that quite a lot in coaching last year. That was one of the key things we were looking for as you as a coach, was how you engage non-participants in your session. So that's the inclusion spectrum. Again, if you're doing a coach ed session on this, it's perhaps worth doing this and indicating how you can work to it as a coach, what you did in your own practicals, how it fit within the inclusion spectrum. In terms of translating inclusion into practice, as we talked about in the practicals, so teaching coaching style, this acronym is TREE, as you see down the side. There's TREE and Change It are the two main models for how you actually make inclusion happen in your practice. TREE I like because it's quite simple, so teaching coaching styles, so adapting how you organise, communicate, lead the session, and we did a lot of that last week with looking at sensory disabilities. Then the rules and regulations, how could you change them? And again, we did that a bit last week where we said about the 1 metre rule for players with complete visual impairments, so that people couldn't come in and invade their space. It gave them time to actually get on the ball and to play. Environment, again, changes to the space for the whole group or for the individual in the group, so you can box off safe spaces that people with disabilities can work in if you're doing sort of invasion games type things. And then equipment, again, we talked about the bell balls, we talked about using a beach ball as a large soft ball that can be helpful in certain circumstances. So how can you modify the equipment to make things easier? So hopefully that's the core sort of principles. So have a read, have a look, particularly if you're going to go and do this on your placement. And we'll look forward to working with you in the next few weeks on adapting your practice to physical disabilities and then looking at the sort of integrative spectrum in week 3.